Thank you, Pambos. The next speaker will be from the National Anti-Doping Commission of Venezuela, Dr. Eduardo Gutierrez.
Delegates to the World Anti-Doping Conference in South Africa 2013, representatives, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to congratulate WADA and the organizing committee in South Africa for the outstanding organization of the World Anti-Doping Conference. As we know, doping is a scourge which affects us all, our young athletes, and we must fight to eradicate it. Venezuela welcomes the process of democratic participation led by WADA to revise the code together with the international standards. It's been an enriching process as we governments and sports movements have all contributed. We are sure that the final result will be very valuable documents which will help to improve the situations obtaining in our countries. I'd like to thank Maria Jose Pese, Director of the WADA Anti-Doping Regional Office for Latin America, located in Uruguay, for his outstanding work and constant support for Spanish-speaking countries. We support regional training efforts being made for South America. We've already attended 2 legal anti-doping seminars held in Colombia and Paraguay. And likewise, a first educational symposium in Latin America was held in Uruguay at the beginning of this year. It was attended by representatives from over 20 countries. These events are very instructive and appreciated. Now, in terms of the material and documents, we have learned that the Spanish Higher Council for Sport will be translating the new 2015 code into Spanish, and CONSUDE, chaired by Uruguay, the new international standards. This will facilitate implementation, dissemination, and access to information. We'd like to take this opportunity as well formally to request that the WADA website, Twitter and Facebook accounts have a version in Spanish. As you all know, Spanish is the official language of 21 countries. It's spoken by over 400 million people who are native speakers, and it's the third most widely used language on the internet with 180 million people. It's very important to have all the material relating to the fight against doping to be available in our language, particularly documents pertaining to the fight, that is the standard for laboratories, testing, TUEs. We would also like in Latin America perhaps to consider having a court of arbitration for sport where cases can be heard in Spanish. This would make it possible to deal expeditiously with many of the sanctions. Thank you very much on behalf of the millions of athletes, trainers, personnel who use Spanish as a mother tongue. I would like sincerely to thank our host country, the Republic of South Africa, its government and people for having extended such a warm welcome to us.
Thank you. Could I invite Paul Melia, President and CEO of the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport. Thank you.
Somos la segunda lengua.
Is Mr. Melia in the room? No, it appears not. Well, we'll move on. The next on my agenda here is... I'm sorry. Please, Mr. Melia. Could the speaker from Venezuela please turn his microphone off? It might help us move on.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, delegates and observers. The Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport serves as Canada's national anti-doping agency. We've been engaged in the fight against doping for over 2 decades. As a proud member of the Institute of National Anti-Doping Organizations, We're grateful for WADA's ongoing financial contribution to INATO, and we fully support INATO's intervention at this convention, as we do the interventions of the Canadian government and the Canadian Olympic Committee. I want to commend WADA for its leadership throughout the extensive code consultation process and ultimately the development of the final 2015 code. The Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport declares its full endorsement of the 2015 code and its standards, and we will implement it accordingly. Now, WADA was born out of a need for one set of harmonized rules governing doping in sport. But one set of rules is only effective if those rules are consistently implemented by all sports in all countries. Today, we have one set of rules. The challenge ahead is to see these rules implemented fairly and consistently across all sports and countries. With this intervention, therefore, I wish to make three very important points. Our first point, WADA must become an effective global anti-doping regulator, a regulator with the authority and willingness to enforce non-compliant sanctions on anti-doping organizations. WADA must stop doing for anti-doping organizations what they can and should do for themselves. WADA must now focus its limited resources on monitoring and regulating code compliance. And such compliance must go beyond self-reporting. Anti-doping organizations must clearly demonstrate that they are implementing the code and running effective, credible anti-doping programs. In our view, this is essential if we wish to make real progress in the fight against doping in sport. Our second point, we cannot ignore our common fiscal reality. The cost of anti-doping continues to climb, yet resources, in many cases, remain stagnant and are shrinking. While government and sport contribute significantly to the fight against doping in sport, there's an obvious sector missing, one that profits tremendously from the product of sport. We must bring international corporations to the table to help finance our work. Government and sport can no longer be the sole funders of the fight against doping in sport. And our third point, in Canada, our centre has led the effort to develop a values-based and principle-driven sports system. We believe this is fundamental and necessary to prevent our next generation of athletes from engaging in cheating. A major enhancement to the 2015 World Code is found in Section 18, which highlights the need for values-based education focused on young people. We applaud WADA for this important improvement. We all must now consider how to engage the necessary partners at the grassroots level of sport within our countries to fully integrate effective values-based education programs. Finally, let me say, in the wake of what has been an historic year in the fight against doping in sport, it is now time for all of us to move from talk to action. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and I'm sorry about those technical difficulties at the beginning. Could I now invite Mr. Bart Zilgistra, who is the Director of Sport, Dutch Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sport. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Netherlands wishes to present 3 recommendations for future anti-doping policy, which, in our opinion, could also be of interest to other countries. These recommendations are from a recent report by a Dutch committee, which was presided by Mrs. Zorgdrager, a former Minister of Justice, and the committee did research into the doping culture in Dutch cycling. First, cultural change is needed, not only in cycling, but throughout sports. The Dutch committee has ascertained that the doping culture in Dutch cycling is changing. The implementation of anti-doping measures, such as blood passports seems to have reduced doping since 2008. The Commission is also observing the beginnings of a cultural change. This cultural change is expressed in reduced acceptance of doping use in the cycling world. The committee found, however, that little is made public about doping in other sports. The committee considers it naive to imagine that doping doesn't take place on a larger scale than is currently known. For this reason, it is wise to be ahead of a crisis and called on the sporting world to take measures comparable to those taken in cycling. The Zorgdrager Committee suggests particularly measures that benefit cultural change. From a young age, athletes should be taught the importance of good nutrition, balanced training, and competition programs and good mental support. It's also in their interest to highlight the dangers and undesirability of doping. Structural programs should be formulated to the education of young athletes, with a special role being reserved for national and international associations supported by the doping authorities. Secondly, the interest of a structured position for openness and safety. The committee ascertained that many people they've spoken to found it important that they could speak out about the past safely and without repercussions, and at the same time could consider lessons for the future. Athletes require a confidential mediator who can help them personally in ethical dilemmas. A structured position of openness and safety can also bring forward information that is essential in supporting and monitoring the cultural change stated already. It enables persons observing issues inconsistent with the desired cultural change to share their information safely. In this framework, an amnesty arrangement can also be considered to give athletes the opportunity to be open about the past without repercussions. This is not possible on the basis of the new WADA code, but it is an ongoing subject and it is one that is important to discuss in the sporting world, also at the international level. Finally, separation of conflicting interests, which is a governing issue. The committee asserted that the UCI's interest in a good image for cycling has possibly had a delaying effect on the development of anti-doping policy. This conflict of interests can be prevented by removing the responsibility for doping control and punishment from international sporting organizations. Ideally, the international sporting or the national sporting association should be responsible for the development of sports and for the associated anti-doping policy, including the necessary public information. Doping checks and punishment would then need to be brought under separate organizations. In the Netherlands, this development is already taking place. Various Dutch sporting associations have decided to outsource their disciplinary code to an Institute for Sport Judicial Services. The Netherlands is taking the lead here, and it is International Connection who would like to plead for others to follow this example. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bart. Look, I think I can indicate to you, just so that you can at least get it through your minds how the agenda's travelling. We're probably, with those who are scheduled to speak, have about 25 minutes left for this afternoon's session. But to effectively break up the program just slightly, we're now going to watch a video which is entitled Keep Free, and Becky Scott, I believe, has something to do with it. Could we have the video, thank you?
My name is Becky Scott. I come from, originally from Vermilion, Alberta. I now live in Canmore, Alberta, and my sport was cross-country skiing. I competed for the Canadian national team for 11 years. I went to 3 Olympic Games. I won a gold medal in Salt Lake City in 2002 and a silver medal in 2006 at the Torino Olympics. It's one of the most integrated sports there is. It's speed, it's power, it's technique, it's endurance, and it's mental toughness. It's a very, very difficult sport. The Salt Lake City Olympics in 2002 were my second Olympic Games of my career. On the day of the race, I had the race of my life, and I had planned it, and I executed it to the finishing stretch, and I crossed the line 1/10 of a second faster than my competitor who finished 4th. So that gave me a bronze medal at the time, which was at that time, the first medal ever for a Canadian in cross-country skiing at the Olympic Games, and the first medal ever for a woman in North America at the Olympic Games. So it was historic. It was very incredible. We celebrated like it was, it was an amazing, overwhelming experience to be there and to stand on the podium for Canada and to receive a medal at the Olympics in Salt Lake City. Just amazing. I was already quite aware and conscious and frustrated by what I knew to be a fairly high level of doping and drug abuse in the sport of cross-country skiing. So I had become an advocate for cleaning up the sport. I had petitioned around the World Cup for greater policing and monitoring of the sport, and I was really behind the scenes trying to make changes to get things cleaned up in cross-country skiing. It was announced that the 2 women who had finished ahead of me in gold and silver medal positions had tested positive for a banned substance. And then we subsequently went through a 1.5 years of appeals through the Court of Arbitration of Sport. And to make a long story short, because that starts to become a long story, I was upgraded first to silver and then to gold for that one race. So actually I've had 3 medals for 1 race. So, for myself personally, yes, it felt great to get a gold medal. Obviously not at all the same sensation as getting it at the day of your race, and seeing the anthem. But at the same time, I felt like I'm taking this medal and I'm accepting it on behalf of so much more than just myself. This is about justice, and this is about clean sport and fair sport and ethical sport. And that's, in a way, more important than just me being an Olympic champion.
Well, that's a remarkable story, as I'm sure you will all agree. And I now invite Becky, who is a member of our WADA Executive and Foundation Board, our Executive Committee, also WADA Athlete Committee, a member of that, member of the ISC and the ISC Athlete Commission. And of course, she's indicated to you that she won gold. She also won a silver medal. Becky, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not sure there's much left to say after the video, but nevertheless, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Becky Scott from Canada. I started skiing and racing as a young kid in my hometown, followed my dreams, and becoming an Olympian, and won a gold medal at Salt Lake City in 2002 and a silver in 2006. Eurosport Television used to run an advertising campaign for cross-country skiing, and they called it the most lung-busting, gut-wrenching sport on the planet. I'm not sure I entirely disagree, because they had it right. Cross-country skiing is truly one of the most toughest, physically demanding sports there is, but it's also a sport with a very long and very troubled history of doping. When I finished 3rd at the Salt Lake City Games behind 2 athletes that subsequently tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs, it was one of the most heartbreaking, discouraging, and frustrating experiences of my life. I had trained my entire life for that moment and that medal, and it was given to a doped athlete. But it was also a defining moment for me, because the injustice behind it all moved me to start to take action and get involved. I realized that by staying silent, I was part of the problem. And so I began to speak out, petition for greater policing and monitoring in our sport, and fight for clean sport for all. I strongly believe that athletes need to get involved. They need to speak up, they need to ask questions, and they need to show that they care about the matters which so profoundly affect them. When I joined WADA's Athletes Committee in 2006, and then WADA's Foundation Board, and now WADA's Executive Committee, it was a great opportunity to represent the voice and the rights of the athletes. And over the past 2 years, the athlete committees and athletes involved have been deeply immersed in the code review process, providing input, feedback, and advice on matters that impact athletes the most. As just one example, intelligent testing and providing whereabouts information are 2 pillars of the anti-doping movement that clean athletes strongly and unequivocally support. Is providing whereabouts an inconvenience for athletes? Perhaps, but it's a small one. I lost out on a gold medal experience at the Olympic Games because 2 doped athletes finished in front of me. The modest inconvenience of providing whereabouts is something that any clean athlete would support and embrace knowing it's helping to level the playing field. Members of WADA's Athlete Committee and IOC Athletes Commission have unanimously long been outspoken and vocal supporters of strengthening the sanction period for real cheats and intentionally doped athletes. This is what clean athletes want and have been calling for a very long time now. Longer sanctions protect clean athletes. They act as a deterrent for potential dopers, and most importantly, they show that doping and using drugs to get ahead in sport is a serious crime worthy of a serious punishment. The 2015 World Anti-Doping Code and Standards is another positive step towards sport that is more clean, fair, and continues to have integrity and respect as its very essence, at its heart. And this, above all, is what athletes want. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. I now invite Ms. Valgard Svarstad Haugland, the chairperson of Anti-Doping Norway, to make an intervention.
President, dear President, dear ministers, dear delegates and friends of sport. Anti-Doping Norway congratulates WADA with the draft code version 4. We thank the Sport Ministry of South Africa and the City of Johannesburg for the invitation to the World Conference and for your warm welcome and hospitality. We strongly support the presented World Anti-Doping Code and Standards. We need a set of common rules in order to promote fairness, equality, and health for athletes worldwide. Anti-Doping Norway has followed the discussion related to the health versus the performance-enhancing aspect as a rationale behind the code and the anti-doping work. Our position has been that sport should play an important role in the protection of health. We are very satisfied that the new code presents the health criteria as important as the performance enhancement criteria. We support the increased sanction for severe doping from 2 to 4 years. It is documented by Norwegian scientists that the performance enhancement effects of anabolic steroids will last well beyond the current 2 years sanction, which underline the need for this decision. Anti-Doping Norway appreciates the increased focus on investigation and intelligence. This past year has shown us that testing alone is not able to detect sophisticated doping. The anti-doping organizations has to find ways of sharing relevant information with public authorities, such as the police and customs. If the public authorities have specific information related to breach of the anti-doping rules for individuals involved in sports, this must be followed up through a result management process. We cannot let the evidence and dopers escape due to lack of sharing of information. A main task for the future is to work on this. Anti-Doping Norway is pleased to observe that the draft code refers to human rights. The right to a fair trial through a public hearing before an impartial and independent hearing body is crucial. We have to continue to strive for excellence also in this field. Further, the principles that come from the separation of power has to be integrated in the anti-doping fight. We urge for a clear separation between the top sport aiming for gold medals and anti-doping organizations covering tasks as intelligence, investigation, and doping controls. Finally, I will mention that WADA is currently the only body able to monitor how the code is implemented. Compliance is not only about implementing the rules, but also to follow the intentions behind the rules in daily operations. For the future, we need a strong WADA who has authority to stop those of us who are not willing to implement and enforce the rules. We believe that WADA's ability to enforce the code and the standards is crucial for the anti-doping movement to improve its performance. This is fundamental to protect the clean athletes. Anti-Doping Norway look forward to taking part in the important work with the implementation of the new code. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I invite an intervention from the President of the National Anti-Doping Organization of Dominica, who is also the President of the Dominica Olympic Committee, Mr. Felix Andre Wilson.
Mr. Chairman, colleagues and friends, good afternoon. I present a small, newly formed NADO's approach to building awareness and advocacy to eliminate doping in sport by the National Anti-Doping Organization of Dominica. Dominica is a small island state in the Caribbean with a population of 70,000 people. In July 2012, the recently formed National Anti-Doping Organization, Inc. of Dominica, by a tripartite group involving the Dominica Olympic Committee, the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sports, and the Ministry of Health, sought to implement an awareness and advocacy program to eliminate doping in sport. The NADO Inc. recognized the need to sensitize the populace involved in competitive and recreational sport to be aware of the unfairness and dangers of the use of doping. In conjunction with the Drug Prevention Unit of the Ministry of Health and the Sports Division of the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sports, as well as the Ministry of Education and Human Resource Development, the NADO Inc. embarked on a nationwide campaign of spreading the WADA messages of play true and say no to doping. The aim of that education program, funded by UNESCO, was to safeguard athletes, particularly young and elite athletes, and the entourage from doping. All parties should be aware of the national and regional disgrace if athletes participating and/or representing Dominica in sport would violate the World Anti-Doping Code, as well as contravene the UNESCO Convention signed by the government of Dominica in January 2012. Within 1 year of the NADO's existence, it secured a national project from the UNESCO Fund for the elimination of doping in sport. Dominica was able to implement that national project with the help of several partners, including Caribbean RADO, Dominica Olympic Committee, Ministries of Health, Education and Sport, Tom May and Maria Joseph Pesce of WADA, all played an integral part in bringing the project to fruition. The NADO complements the WADA for providing from the outreach model the key tools used in the education and training program. The organization was able to inform almost the entire population of Dominica. On the basis of the WADA outreach model, NADO was able to coordinate the project through workshop, billboards, etc. In so doing, the NADO got the messages out to athletes, coaches, physical educators, health personnel, and other support entourage. An analysis of the information gathered in the evaluation done at the end of the project indicated that the NADO of Dominica met all its objectives and had influenced positive behaviors, particularly in young athletes. Therefore, the project was highly beneficial and successful. NADO of Dominica remains eternally grateful for the assistance of UNESCO and the positive direction and support of WADA for helping Dominicans to say no to doping and inspire a small island state to do the right thing in the fight against doping. Finally, let me thank South Africa for having hosted such a great event and for the hospitality provided. On behalf of NADO of Dominica, I also extend my congratulations to all stakeholders who participated in the code and standards revision process, and WADA for having achieved the new and improved version of these documents, which we hope will help and sustain us to keep fighting for doping-free sport. Last but not least, Ann Jensen, you are a darling. Thank you.
Well, you've certainly made Anne Jansen's day. Thank you. Next, we move to Japan, and to make an intervention on behalf of the Japanese anti-doping organisation, of which he is the president, I invite Professor Hidenori Suzuki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Japan Anti-Doping Agency, JADA, would like to warmly welcome to the World Anti-Doping Code and the international standards that will be effective in 2015. Considering the global anti-doping movement led by the World Anti-Doping Agency face a wider sporting integrity issue, JADA would like to reaffirm our commitment in achieving justice and fairness in sport, along with the Japanese government, and by working closely with WADA and our colleagues from NADOS, RADOS, and the sport movement. JADA would like to make, in particular, the following 3 points. First, we realize that the World Anti-Doping Code is our code. We are happy to see how each ADO's roles and responsibilities are clarified in the revised code. For example, in granting TUEs. We hope to see WADA taking a regulatory and monitoring role so that we see more effective and efficient anti-doping program. Secondly, recognizing doping as a social issue, we would like to welcome how education and preventative measures are more focused than ever before in the new code. Japan has introduced the anti-doping education into the national curriculum, and the anti-doping education has become a compulsory area of study along with the Olympic movement. To instill good values in young people, we hope that we can work more collaboratively at international, regional, and domestic levels for further implementation. Thirdly, collaboration, cooperation, partnerships should come more at the heart of the anti-doping movement. Sharing information is one, and sharing resources, knowledge, expertise, and opportunities could effectively be utilized. We believe the philosophy of Japanese founding father of modern sport, Professor Jigoro Kano, who plays for Jita Kyoei, meaning mutual prosperity for oneself and others. This thinking can be applied to the next phase of anti-doping program when we aim for our ultimate aim. In closing, for the future generation, we hope that sport can be relevant to them from the perspective of anti-doping. We also hope that in the lead up to 2020, we can share our passion to sport more than we do now, and more importantly, we share the pulse through sport. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Suzuki. And now to the manager of the National Anti-Doping Organisation of Colombia, Mr. Orlando Reyes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to speak Spanish.
Colombia is making ever greater efforts to combat doping. It is strengthening the National Anti-Doping Organization and its structure, introducing new measures in terms of intelligent testing and athletes' biological passports. Also, we are closely monitoring the implementation of sanctions in the event of violations. The new code comprises two new violations which are further tools in the fight against doping. Likewise, there is a challenge when it comes to proper implementation. We think that the code cannot adjust to the various domestic legislations in countries, so the challenge will have to be taken up by each national anti-doping organization and country. What about complicity in doping when we're talking about people who aren't within the sports system? How can one provide for proper implementation of the standard on prohibited association, which applies to athletes? In practice, this may be a sanction for a professional who has already been sanctioned and can ask for some special treatment. This challenge has to be solved in each country, and this is what we're going to do. Some parts of the text in the code and the standard have to be dealt with locally where there are obsolete laws, particularly in terms of disciplinary movement measures in sporting movements. Sometimes there are very slow procedures, and sometimes there's a total lack of tools to investigate and wind up cases pertaining to the violation of standards. Local standards have to adjust and evolve. We have to provide for proper coordination between the various anti-doping organizations. In particular, we think it's very important to boost cooperation with international organizations. Of course, WADA is very useful in terms of revising sanctions and possible appeals before a sports tribunal. A supranational entity like WADA can regulate and intervene, and this has given us greater guarantees and protection in terms of possible conflicts of interest which may occur on a local level. We also think it's necessary to focus efforts on this kind of cooperation. Doping is similar around the world. There are even criminal groups which organize doping, and we have to boost cooperation in terms of investigations. It's absolutely necessary to do our utmost to investigate sanctions and focus on scientific means of gathering proof. Of course, we need to focus also on preventive measures. Compartmentalization, division in functions should be overcome. We need to focus on cooperation. Economic resources are dwindling, and we need, therefore, to use the available means efficiently. I would call for intelligent cooperation, therefore. I wish to congratulate WADA on its very successful process in revising the code. It is providing us, indeed, with an extremely valuable tool. Thank you.
Thank you. And I can now indicate the last intervention of the day will come from Mr. Travis Targett, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the United States Anti-Doping Agency. Thank you, Travis.
Mr. President, thank you for inviting me to provide this intervention today. It's an honor for me to be here representing the USADA board, our chairman, Olympic great Dr. Edwin Moses, and the tens of millions of clean athletes that we represent in the United States. I want to personally thank you, Mr. President, John Fahey, for your leadership and courage, and to congratulate you and your team. Without your guidance and support during our cycling investigation, and particularly the Lance Armstrong case, justice would not have prevailed. Clean athletes, thank you. This is a fight to preserve the soul of sport and to provide equality for clean athletes, as described on page 1 of the revised code. Overall, the code has worked, but only when executed and fully implemented with strength and determination. Athletes have been prevented and deterred from doping, and clean athletes now have hope that they can compete without using dangerous performance-enhancing drugs. Athletes, doctors, and others have been caught, even the most sophisticated ones with massive resources, and they have been held accountable, sending a powerful message to athletes that defrauding sport does not pay. Most importantly, it has been demonstrated that competing clean is a priority, and that there are independent organizations like WADA that will take a stand, even when tough, even involving a global icon, and even when sport itself might obstruct the truth, to ensure that injustice and inequality for all athletes does not win the day. Of course, like everyone in this theater, and like all in the past at each of the WADA conferences, when the microphones are on and the cameras are rolling, we all express our support and our commitment for the principles of fair play and the WADA Code. But clean athletes want to know, what happens when the mics are gone and the cameras are off and we leave this conference? Are we still on their team? The current WADA program being voted on is the gold standard, the best playbook in the world to win this fight for equality. But the 438 pages of the WADA playbook is only as good as the paper that it's written on if the resources, the resolve, and the courage of everyone in this room, and many not here today, is fully vested in ensuring full implementation that the program requires. Having the gold standard playbook without full implementation is like having a prize Lamborghini without an engine. It goes nowhere. It is vital to the success that we also have adequate funding. Out of the $800 to $1 trillion in global sport today, less than half of 1% of that is being spent on this, the biggest threat to sport. It's time for us all to put our money where our mouth is. The fight for equality in sport is not a game. It's not a charade. And if we tolerate this injustice in sport, then we'll tolerate it in every aspect of our society. The third American president, Thomas Jefferson, said, "One man with courage is a majority." It is not by chance that we are here in South Africa, where the courage of one man turned a majority into finally achieving full equality for all of South Africa. Let's use this moment to fully commit to finally achieving a fully implemented, revised, gold standard WADA code and ensure equality for all athletes of the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Travis, and I can't think of a better way to have an inspirational conclusion to a day of concentration and, dare I say, significant input from many, many of you. You didn't all agree, but you made your points and you made a clear statement that you are supportive of the work that's been done in the revision of the code. But more about that tomorrow. Can I thank you for your patience and also for the work that's been done by so many of you who have made these interventions. There will be more tomorrow, and they will start at 9 a.m. in the morning. So if I could ask you to ensure that you're in the room and sitting at 9 o'clock, and that will enable us to continue to work within the guidelines we've got to keep the program on schedule. For tonight, can I suggest to each of you, I trust it's a pleasant and a happy occasion and that you enjoy one another's company in some way. And I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow morning. Thank you.